What if, Tensura, Melting the Eternal Frost Part 9 author, JackDaWeb on Wattpad. This story depicts an alternate timeline wherein Velzard attends Walpurgis after sensing Veldora's presence. She subsequently meets our protagonist and becomes interested in him after his display at the meeting. After thinking for a bit, she decides to move to Tempest and becomes a close ally of Rimuru. Please note that Rimuru and Velzard will sometimes be out of character, as it is unavoidable for this premise. Rimuru, our protagonist, will be more rational and have an actual spine. Velzard, she will not be as cold and ruthless as her canon counterpart. Since Velzard is missing significant characterization in the early parts of the series, the author decided to write his own interpretation of her personality based on the original light novel. I recommend at least having seen the second season of the anime, since the story picks up from that point. This fanfiction will follow the main story beats from the original light novel, though some arcs will be glossed over if there are very few changes to the canon events. Chapter 23 Playtime's over. Rimuru's POV. It's a relief that Milim and Velzard finally reconciled. I couldn't quite make out what they said to each other, and I didn't want to pry, but from their smiles and even the hug, it seemed promising. Yet there's still a glaring issue. Those two still want to fight. Aren't they satisfied yet? I don't know how much longer this barrier can hold. Every time a stray attack slams into it, I have to replenish its strength, eating up more of my magicules. Honestly, it's impressive that the barrier has lasted this long. Yo, Veldora, how are you holding up? Lucky you. I can't say the same. I'm burning through magicules at an alarming rate. You have depleted less than 5% of your magicule supply. Oi, Seal, did you just casually reveal yourself to Veldora? Really? I see. And you're fine with him knowing about you, Seal? Yes, Rimuru-sama. Besides, even if Veldora didn't know before, his assimilation with you transferred his soul into yours, where I reside. Hiding myself from him would have been practically impossible. I suppose that makes sense when you put it that way. Foo. I commend you for recognizing it, Veldora. Yeah, who would have thought? Alright, fine. But that still leaves us with one colossal issue. What are we going to do about those two battle maniacs? Huh? Are you insane? That's not exactly the point, you know? Rimuru-sama, I suggest intervening in their battle once your magicule supply has depleted by 10%. See, Seal? Isn't that cutting it a bit close? With 10% fewer magicules, I'd be at a serious disadvantage. Rest assured, Rimuru-sama. You'll be powerful enough, thanks to Veldora's assimilation. Plus, they're both holding back considerably. Not that this fills me with confidence, but I'll take what I can get. Also, intervening would be the perfect opportunity to test a new ability we've developed. Wait, did you just say, we? That's surprising. What on earth are you two up to? Veldora and I have devised a combat mechanism accessible when True Dragon Release is active, thanks to Veldora's assimilation. A combat mechanism? So, while I was busy holding the barrier, they were tinkering around with new abilities? I expected this from Seal, but Veldora? Consider the transformations Milim and Velzard are using. Both achieved new forms via battle mode, a transformation that alters their bodies into one's ideal for combat. This mechanism optimizes based on various attributes such as physical, magical, and spiritual. So, you're saying I'll get my own battle form, like Milim and Velzard? Precisely. Awesome. Just as expected of you, Seal. But, what exactly was Veldora's role in this? That's right. Even if he's technically assimilated with me, most of my energy is Veldora's. Still, that doesn't explain why Seal said, we. It took us some time to find the most efficient combat form for you, balancing your immense abilities and the boost from Veldora. But we've developed a transformation perfectly tailored to you, Rimuru-sama. Thank you, both of you. I honestly don't know how far I'd be if it weren't for you two supporting me. No problem, Rimuru-sama. Would you like to activate battle mode? Wait, hold on. I can't just unleash a trump card like that in public. That is not a problem, Rimuru-sama. With a little illusion magic and thought manipulation to mask the transformation, no one will know a thing. Alright then. I trust you. Activating battle mode, Storm. As soon as Ciel's voice resonated through my mind, I felt a surge of power that I could only describe as an awakening. I stood from my seat, ready for the change. Unlike Milim or Velzard's swift transformations, mine wasn't as instantaneous. It was a slower and more deliberate process. It felt almost like the world around me was adjusting to the change. My form pulsed with raw energy as it began to reshape itself. I could feel my body elongating, growing taller and more imposing, yet lighter simultaneously. My movements became fluid, as if I were floating through space. It was the strangest sensation. Through the power of illusion magic, the surrounding spectators were none the wiser, continuing their conversations and marveling at the ongoing battle as if nothing unusual was happening. With the transformation still in progress, I soared into the air, lifting myself above the crowd. From this height, I had the perfect vantage point to observe the clash between Milim and Velzard. The arena stretched beneath me like a vast battlefield, and the intensity of their fight was something I'd never fully grasped until now. As I hovered, the final touches of my transformation clicked into place. I focused on myself using universal perception, trying to get a clearer view of the changes. What I saw was breathtaking. The most immediate change was the large, majestic dragon wings that unfurled from my back. Their dark blue scales shimmered with electric currents, recalling the stormy skies that Veldora always associated with. Lightning arcs crackled along the wings' edges, flickering like living veins of power. Next, I noticed the lightning marks streaking down my face, glowing a sharp yellow and radiating power with each passing second. My physique had grown more muscular, though I still retained a lean, agile build. But the most striking feature, and one that stood out above all else, was my hair. My platinum blue strands had been laced with golden streaks, cascading like ribbons of light. I could almost feel Veldora's influence in that choice. And it wasn't just my physical form that had transformed. My attire had also been completely overhauled. I now wore a cloak, which, unsurprisingly, was a god-grade piece of clothing. Its hues of white and blue were a testament to its divine nature. Gone was the demon lord jacket I was accustomed to. In its place was a garment of refined elegance designed for battle. My forearms were encased in armor made of heavily condensed magicules, the surface gleaming with an almost ethereal glow. It was reminiscent of the bracelets of a legendary warrior, except mine covered the entire length of my arms, offering both style and protection. I couldn't help but laugh aloud. Now, this feels like a true dragon, I exclaimed, the exhilaration of the transformation surging through me. Ha ha ha! Amazing, I bellowed. So, this is what Milim and Velzard feel when they enter battle mode. Now I understand why they get so fired up. This power, this new form, was incredible. The efficiency was off the charts. Even the most potent spells or skills could be cast with minimal magicule expenditure. With this new form, I could maintain the barrier much longer without exhausting myself. I felt ready to take on anyone, even the likes of Guy, Milim, or Velzard. I continued observing the battle, now with a sharper sense of awareness. The intensity of their fight escalated with each passing moment. Blinding sparks, shockwaves, and blasts of magic shook the very air. Even with my enhanced senses, tracking their movements was still difficult. They were too fast and too powerful. The spectators below seemed to be in a state of pure awe. Unlike the raucous cheers from earlier in the tournament, there was only stunned silence now. The power on display was something they'd likely never witness again. Then, unexpectedly, Milim and Velzard stopped midair, hovering face to face. A tense silence fell over the arena. Wait, is the battle finally over? Are they satisfied? Before I could finish the thought, both of them began charging up another attack. What the hell? That looks like it could level the entire arena. Detecting extreme surges of magicules. I can see that. Drago Nova, Milim shouted, unleashing a devastating beam of energy at Velzard. Frostbreak, Velzard countered, her icy assault rocketing toward Milim. The two beams collided in midair, a blinding flash lighting up the arena. At first, I thought it would be a classic beam clash, but the spectacle that followed was unlike anything I expected. Milim's attack, made of stardust, should have been overwhelming, an incredibly destructive force. But Velzard somehow managed to nullify much of it. The beam released by Velzard made use of her deceleration. By countering Milim's energy with a form of negative energy, Velzard effectively neutralized most of the incoming attack. That is the true extent of Velzard's power? Negative energy that cancels out positive energy? That's incredible. Though Milim's attack still had too much force to be entirely negated, I had to admit, I was impressed. I began to wonder if I could counteract Drago Nova. There are several potential ways to counteract Drago Nova, now that it has been analyzed. The first method would be to consume it directly with Azathoth, although it may prove difficult to consume all of it. Another way is to nullify it with Turn Null. However, it's a dangerous option since the destructive energy of imaginary collapse can harm you. The most optimal method would be utilizing Frost Magic with Azathoth and generating negative energy to dampen Stardust's power enough to consume it. Just like what Velzard did, huh? Good to know. Thanks, Seal. I will do further analysis on Stardust once the fight is over. There may be better ways to deal with it. I expect great things from you, partner. The residual energy of their attacks exploded on contact, sending a violent shockwave that cracked the barrier. The barrier, though strong, trembled under the pressure as I quickly stabilized it, my magicules depleting by 10% in the process. It was time to act. With my resolve hardening, I warped directly into the battlefield, positioning myself squarely between Milim and Velzard just as their attacks were about to collide. My arms shot out instinctively, hands outstretched, and with a deep breath, I braced myself for impact. I felt an immense surge of energy through my body. The force of their strikes hit me directly, like being struck by a storm of raw, unfiltered power. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I absorbed it. My body buzzed with power, the kinetic energy flowing into Azathoth, neutralizing the worst of it. I think your fight has gone on long enough, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the tension of the arena. The words rang out, surprising both Milim and Velzard. Rimuru? Milim stuttered, her voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. She recoiled slightly, her eyes wide in shock, as she hovered back, taking in the sight of me. Rimu-kun? What's with the new look? Velzard asked, her voice laced with curiosity and a hint of admiration. I couldn't help but grin smugly, my aura now radiating a palpable intensity. HMPH. You two aren't the only ones with battle forms, I replied. They stared at me, eyes wide in amazement, clearly impressed by what they saw. So this is your battle form, Rimuru? Milim asked excitedly, circling me like a curious predator, examining every inch of my new appearance. Fufufu tilde, it looks like you fused with Veldora, but the form looks amazing, Velzard commented with genuine approval. Well, I did have to assimilate his energy with me so I could hold my ground, I said, throwing Milim a side eye. She awkwardly whistled, pretending not to notice my pointed remark. I sighed. You two are a handful, I muttered, causing Velzard to chuckle lightly. Next time, let's fight, Rimuru. Milim demanded excitedly, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Hard pass. I immediately denied her, shaking my head. Why? It's such a waste not to use your battle form. And one that's extremely powerful, too. Milim pouted, a childlike whine creeping into her voice. My battle form is for emergency cases only. Besides, I can't use it without Veldora, I explained, crossing my arms with a sigh, which caused Milim to slump, disappointed. I've also devised a battle mode that doesn't require the assimilation with Veldora. Huh? You can't just casually drop a bombshell like that. Oh well. Thanks, Seal. Fufufu. No problem, Rimuru-sama. I couldn't help but smirk, knowing this little revelation was bound to be a game-changer. But I wasn't about to tell Milim that. I could already see her pestering me for a fight at every opportunity if she found out. Despite my new strength, I knew well enough that I wasn't ready to challenge the likes of Milim, Guy, or Velzard without using True Dragon Release, or Imaginary Collapse. Now that the fight had paused, I reverted to my usual form. Milim and Velzard did the same. I released the barrier, feeling the drained magicules slowly replenish, and brought Veldora into the physical plane, restoring my EP to 25,700,000. How sad. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Kuahahaha. How did it feel wielding the power of a true dragon, Rimuru? Veldora's voice boomed with excitement, his grin impossible to miss. Milim and Velzard eagerly awaited my response, eyes filled with anticipation. If the circumstances were better. I began, then glanced at the two of them with a dry expression. They both quickly averted their gaze, looking sheepish under my scrutiny. It would have been a lot better. But regardless, that was amazing. I almost got drunk on power. Thanks for your help today, Veldora. I said with a sincere tone, my gratitude genuine. Let me know if you ever need to wield my power again. Veldora agreed enthusiastically, and I gave him a grateful nod with a smile. This makes me wonder, could you do the same with me, Rimuru-kun? Velzard asked, her curiosity piqued, drawing Milam and Veldora's attention. Definitely. But I'll explain it more at another time, I replied, keeping my answer brief, aware that it was a topic best discussed in private. Fu tilde looking forward to it, Velzard said with a knowing smile, her eyes sparkling mischievously. Third-person POV. The banter between Milam, Rimuru, Veldora, and Velzard reverberated through the Colosseum, their voices sharp with playful competitiveness. However, the audience could hardly comprehend the sheer scale of what they had just witnessed. What appeared to be a mere clash between two powerful individuals was, in fact, a battle between gods. Few, if any, had ever been granted the privilege of witnessing such a confrontation, let alone one so vivid and unrestrained. It was a once-in-a-lifetime event, a rare moment in history where the heavens themselves seemed to participate in the clash of titans. But what truly stunned Rimuru's subordinates was not the battle itself but rather his unexpected intervention. In a show of audacity that took them by surprise, he had stepped directly between Milam and Velzard at the peak of their clash, absorbing the full brunt of their devastating attacks. As Rimuru went in to interfere with the battle, Seal swiftly wove her illusion magic, cloaking the eyes of every spectator who wasn't one of Rimuru's trusted executives. To the audience's bewildered gaze, it appeared as though the fight had come to a sudden halt, with Rimuru having stepped in to declare the match over before either combatant had gained the upper hand. The true nature of his transformation, his newly awakened battle form, remained hidden, leaving the spectators none the wiser. They saw only the aftermath, the brief exchange, and Rimuru's calm yet commanding voice. What followed was deafening applause, filling the Colosseum with a roar of appreciation. Cheers and shouts of excitement erupted as the audience, unaware of the true depths of what had occurred, celebrated the conclusion of the battle and the festival. Yet, while the crowd reveled in the spectacle, the executives were left in stunned silence, their minds racing with questions. For all of Rimuru's power, even his closest allies had never witnessed anything like this before. Excluding Diablo and Zijin, who seemed almost unaffected by the turn of events, the rest of his executives stared in awe. They had known their master was strong, of course. But this was on an entirely different level. His ability to stop Milam and Velzard and absorb their power without a scratch left them speechless. The display of strength was beyond anything they had anticipated, and though it surpassed their expectations, they couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for the being they had pledged their loyalty to. Even more intriguing was the sense that Rimuru's unmistakably powerful aura now seemed to hint at another presence. There was something familiar yet foreign about it, a trace of Veldora's unmistakable energy that wove through Rimuru's own. The executives exchanged uncertain glances, each trying to decipher what had transpired. Veldora had been absent throughout the battle, and they couldn't shake the suspicion that something extraordinary had happened between their master and the storm dragon. A fusion, perhaps? It was an absurd thought, one that defied logic. Yet, in Rimuru's case, logic seemed to bend and twist in unexpected ways. The idea was almost laughable, but it lingered, unspoken, in their minds. After all, their master was the very definition of absurdity. As the four gods descended from the sky, their feet touching the ground with a light thud, Rimuru strode toward the podium with the same calm confidence that had come to define him. He raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. With a warm smile, Rimuru declared the grand tournament of battle, and by extension, the entire founding festival, a resounding success. The Colosseum erupted once more, the applause reaching a crescendo that echoed throughout the city. In a rare moment of formal grace, Rimuru, Milam, Veldora, and Velzard bowed together, offering the audience a final gesture of thanks. Their movements were elegant yet tinged with their usual playful energy, reflecting the camaraderie they shared despite the overwhelming power each of them wielded. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in the golden glow of twilight, Rimuru and Velzard gathered with their remaining guests for one final dinner. The night had descended quietly, marking the end of the long and joyous celebration. The air was calmer now, the bustling activity of the festival gradually giving way to a more intimate, reflective atmosphere. This final meal was a bittersweet conclusion to the founding festival, a moment where allies would part ways and return to their respective homelands. Rimuru's POV. Everything had gone smoothly so far. Thank Veldonava, Aside from a few bumps in the road, mainly due to some, battle maniacs, the event had been a roaring success. The atmosphere in the Colosseum had been electric, and everything from the grand tournament of battle to the founding festival had gone off without a hitch. Of course, there was the minor issue of Shimo being placed too high in the dungeon, but I could easily fix that with a quick adjustment. It was a simple move of her position, and the problem was solved. But now, here we were, sitting at the grand dining hall for the last dinner before our guests would leave the next day. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of a grand festival and the start of a quieter time in Tempest. Velzard, ever the graceful figure, had returned to her maid form. There were no longer any lingering questions from the guests about her transformation, and that was a relief. It seemed like the whole matter had been forgotten entirely, and I wasn't about to bring it up again. It looks like she intends to uphold her end of the bet, though. I couldn't help but feel a little smug about that. Oh, and I had also told everyone who hadn't been under the illusion magic to keep what really happened between me, Velzard, and Milam a secret. My new battle form, which I'd used in the fight, needed to stay under wraps. It was my trump card, and I wasn't about to let that slip to anyone outside of Tempest. Not even our allies could know about it. Speaking of which, I briefly mentioned that I could assimilate both Veldora and Velzard simultaneously during our battle. I've yet to try it, but I wonder how that form would turn out. The new battle form would indeed have a new appearance if Velzard and Veldora were assimilated. Makes sense. By the way, you mentioned earlier that Velzard gained an ultimate skill during the battle. Do you know what it is? The ultimate skill is known as Lord of Envy, Leviathan, a member of the Sin series, just like Beelzebub. Its main attributes are analysis and empowering the user through their desires. I see. So it's like a mix of Raphael and some other skill. Exactly. Velzard's power had just taken a massive leap. Ultimate skills were already immensely powerful. Now she has two, Lord of Envy, Leviathan, and Lord of Patience, Gabriel, on top of her inherent true dragon abilities. She was a force to be reckoned with, no doubt about it. And when you add in the synergy between Leviathan and Gabriel, that was a truly lethal combination. It was almost as if those two skills were meant to complement one another. Moving on, it would take a real emergency for me to consider assimilating both Veldora and Velzard. But if I did, the results would be staggering. If I used True Dragon Release with both of them, my existence value would skyrocket to 194,700,000, almost halfway to the threshold for the Genesis class. The thought of gaining that much power was tempting, but I knew the risks. On top of that, I'd gain a new, battle mode, form. That was exciting, to say the least. It would truly be the last resort, though. There was too much at stake to use such power casually. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what that form would look like. Additionally, battle mode, Frost, would be a terrifying combination of power and appearance. Seela and Velzard would make an unstoppable duo, no doubt. I was curious to see what kind of destruction they'd bring in battle. But, of course, Velzard assimilating with me meant she would learn about Ciel's existence. That gave me pause. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Heck, I didn't even know if Ciel was prepared to reveal herself to her. She had always kept a low profile ever since her days as Great Sage. She'd preferred staying hidden, even from my closest subordinates. But Velzard was a special case. Back then, Raphael had allowed her existence to be known to Velzard. So maybe, just maybe, Rimuru-sama, I suggest using True Dragon Release, Frost, at a later date. I thought you'd be against it. Not at all. I want to experiment with a new battle form for you using Velzard's attributes this time. I see. How opportunistic. Ha ha ha. I bet you'll also do further analysis on her new skill or something ridiculous like that. Not exactly the skill, but something else. Ooh, what? I'd like to confirm something about Leviathan, and assimilating Velzard is the best way to do it. Alright then. I trust your judgment. My ability to absorb the traits of others and the potential to gain even more power from them were both a blessing and a burden. This wasn't the first time I'd faced such dilemmas, but something about this felt different. Whatever came next, I was sure it would be an adventure. Third-person POV. Everyone continued eating their meal, the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of conversation filling the grand dining hall. Laughter and lively chatter bounced off the walls as the guests eagerly discussed the battles they had witnessed throughout the day. The atmosphere was one of light-hearted celebration and a sense of reverence for what had transpired. Masayuki, much to his own surprise, had become the talk of the evening. He was being hailed as a supreme hero by some of the more enthusiastic guests, who praised his performance in the battles. Rimuru and Velzard exchanged amused glances at the over-the-top compliments, both knowing full well the real story behind the scenes. It was clear that the guests had no idea about the intricacies of the battles or the true nature of the participants. Nevertheless, watching Masayuki bask in the unexpected admiration was entertaining, even if the accolades were a bit exaggerated. The dungeon was brought up once again, and this time, the guests couldn't stop marveling at its complexity. They spoke in awe about the intricate mechanisms, the elaborate traps, and the sheer ingenuity behind the entire project. They praised the way it was designed to test both prowess and wit, fascinated by the cleverness that went into its creation. Rimuru smiled at their enthusiasm while Velzard remained largely silent, her gaze distant as she sipped her drink. To them, it was a fascinating marvel. To her, it was just another element of Tempest's growing power. Of course, the night's main highlight was the clash between Milam and Velzard. The guests were utterly captivated by the sheer scale of the fight, their voices filled with awe as they recounted the spectacle. They spoke of the raw power they had seen in the air, the unrelenting strength of the two combatants, and the mind-boggling intensity of the battle. Milam, with her usual boisterous confidence, looked smug the entire time they talked. She basked in the praise, grinning widely as she imagined it was all directed at her. In truth, the guests were praising her power to some extent, but their words were more balanced between the two dragons. Velzard, however, sat with an elegance that almost seemed out of place given the conversation. She was completely unfazed by the attention, her demeanor calm and composed as she quietly listened, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Time passed quickly as the guests continued to chat excitedly about the event, dissecting every detail of the battle. Half an hour later, the dinner had concluded. The servants cleared away the plates, and Rimuru stood up, signaling that the evening's formalities were drawing to a close. He made his way over to each group of guests, exchanging words and thanking them for attending the festival. His interactions were warm and gracious, ensuring that everyone felt appreciated for their participation. A few of the guests decided to stay the night in Tempest, eager to rest before the long journey back to their respective homes. Others, more keen to return to their own lands, opted for teleportation. Rimuru didn't mind either way, as Tempest had already proven itself a place of great hospitality and comfort. Once all the farewells had been said and the guests had taken their leave, Rimuru made his final remarks to the remaining few. He was content with how the festival had turned out. His expectations had been exceeded, and Tempest had truly put its best foot forward. The guests left, satisfied with their experience, and the grand hall began to empty out. Typically, this would have been the moment for Rimuru and Velzard to head home for the night, retire from the day's events, and enjoy some much-needed rest. However, they had different matters to attend to. With a quick glance at Velzard, Rimuru nodded, signaling they would take care of business first. They made their way toward the capital, entering the meeting hall with purposeful strides. The hour was late, but Rimuru had called for a brief meeting. It was a formality, really, as most of Tempest's monsters didn't require sleep. A few of the more recent additions had adapted to the schedule, but the core group of executives had continued to work outside of scheduled hours. Within minutes, the room began to fill with Tempest's key figures. The core executives arrived, each entering in their own fashion, some materializing from shadows, others simply walking in like the dignitaries they were. Despite the lateness of the hour, there was no sense of weariness in the room. Rimuru's Pavai decided to call for a meeting once the guests had left for the night. The hall had already emptied, leaving only the faint remnants of the evening's festivities. The lingering warmth of the fire, the soft clinking of leftover cutlery on tables, and the hum of contented voices had finally quieted. Considering how much everyone had been working over the past few days in preparation for the founding festival, I felt bad. It had been a non-stop series of events, and with the night growing late, I was sure most of my executives were exhausted. Still, some matters needed urgent attention, and I wasn't about to delay them any longer. During the festival, Yuki arranged an expedition to JackDaWeb, Clayman's former territory. It would take place in a few days, so I needed to prepare for that. I will most likely be away from Tempest for a few weeks. The Western Council matter was weighing heavily on my mind as well. It was about time I started dealing with these concerns. I leaned back in my chair, my thoughts drifting to the upcoming expedition. There was a good reason to suspect that the entire venture was a trap, a carefully crafted ploy by Yuki to bait me. Despite the risks involved, I couldn't afford to let that deter me. This would be an excellent opportunity to lure him into the open and expose his true nature. If I played my cards right, the expedition could be decisive in dealing with him for good. Yuki might have his manipulations and schemes, but I wasn't worried. Despite all the plotting, I was reasonably confident that he wouldn't be able to cause me much harm. After all, when it came down to it, he is weak. He may have the ability to deceive and manipulate, but he didn't possess the kind of raw power that could threaten me. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to let some petty schemes derail everything I'd worked toward. Then there was the matter of the Western Council. Despite its power and influence, I wasn't entirely convinced that joining them would be the best path forward. However, I knew that being part of the council could offer significant advantages to my goal of coexistence. The influence it could grant would allow me to extend Tempest's reach, ensuring that our voice was heard on the international stage. That said, I wasn't naive. If the council started making ridiculous demands or attempting to control us, I'd have no problem backing off and finding another way. Tempest would never be manipulated or subjugated by anyone, council or not. However, if I were to join the Western Council, I would need a powerful and intelligent ambassador to represent Tempest. Someone who could hold their own in political circles and not just make a good impression but actually command respect. It would be a delicate balance, as I couldn't just send anyone into such a high-stakes environment. Then I recalled Velzard's suggestion about the White Primordial, Blanc, and the possibility of her filling the role of Tempest's representative. Blanc's abilities, combined with her status, would make her an invaluable asset to the council. However, I had yet to speak with Diablo about her. There was still so much I didn't know. With this meeting, I could finally ask him for more details about Blanc and gain a better understanding of what she could offer. I composed myself in my seat, taking a deep breath to clear my thoughts. It was time to address these matters head-on. Looking around at the executives gathered in the room, I met their eyes one by one. The faces of my most trusted subordinates were all set in expressions of readiness, waiting for me to speak. I could feel the weight of the upcoming discussion, but I knew they were more than capable of handling whatever came next. Without further hesitation, I began the meeting. "Thank you all for showing up to this late and sudden meeting," I said firmly, my voice carrying through the room. Everyone nodded in acknowledgement, their expressions serious but expectant. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate everyone for contributing to the resounding success of the founding festival, I announced proudly, the warmth of gratitude filling my tone. The room erupted into applause, their hands clapping in appreciation of the hard work and effort everyone had put in. It was a proud moment, and seeing everyone so content made the late-night meeting more worthwhile. Once the applause had died down, I motioned for them to settle. With the mood lightened but still purposeful, I continued. "Now then, the first matter to be discussed is the upcoming expedition to JackDaWeb. I have a good reason to suspect that it's a trap meant for me. Yuki is quite a suspicious individual, after all," I explained briefly, my eyes scanning the faces of the executives. They all nodded, absorbing the information with their usual focused attention. "Will you call off the expedition, Rimuru-sama?" Shuna asked, her voice tinged with concern. She wasn't wrong to be worried, since there were many unknowns in this situation. "Not at all. In fact, I'd like to use the expedition as an opportunity to lure him out into the open. I speculate he'll have forces ready to overwhelm me when the perfect time comes, so I've devised a plan," I said confidently, feeling the weight of my words. If Yuki wanted a confrontation, I'd be ready for it. "Is it to fight fire with fire?" Benimaru asked, a slight grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, clearly intrigued by the idea. I returned the grin with a smirk. "Exactly. Yuki likely plans to go to JackDaWeb via carriage, but I intend to arrive using a different method. Velzard and I will head there first, and she'll conceal her presence as soon as we arrive. Gobta, Shion, and Sue will accompany Yuki and his group on the carriage to keep an eye on them," I informed them. "Understood, Rimuru-sama," Sue affirmed with his usual calm demeanor. "You can count on me, Rimuru-sama," Shion exclaimed, her chest puffing out with pride. "Fufufu tilde, so I'll be a hidden force of sorts." "I'm excited," Velzard chimed in with a devious grin, her eyes flashing with excitement at the prospect of a bit of deception. While I'm confident that Yuki can't do anything to me, it's better to be safe. Who knows what horrors lie waiting in JackDaWeb? If things get messy, I'll transport some troops to the expedition site. Benimaru, I'd like you to have some military personnel on standby, I requested, my tone serious. Benimaru nodded without hesitation, understanding the gravity of the situation. Now for my next concern. It's about the Western Council, I said, shifting the topic as I laid out my next point of focus. What of it? Kaijin asked curiously, his brows furrowed in interest. I intend to try joining it, as doing so would benefit my goal of achieving coexistence with humanity, I explained. There was a noticeable shift in the room as my executives processed the new information. A few of them widened their eyes in surprise. After all, joining the council hadn't been directly discussed until now. Shuna, ever the realist, was the first to speak up. I fear they still resent us monsters, even if Luminous-san has changed the doctrine. It'll take a long time for humans to adjust to such a drastic change. Her voice held a touch of dejection, her concern genuine. I gave a slight nod, understanding her hesitation. Luminous had done her best to shift the doctrine, but humans weren't exactly known for their swift adjustments. Given the political climate, it would take longer than we might have. It's worth giving a shot since it's the best way. But joining would mean I'd require an ambassador to represent Tempest in the council. They'd have to be quite powerful and capable of handling matters diplomatically, I explained, hoping to convey the importance of selecting the right person for the role. Xian, as expected, perked up at the mention of the position. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Then I shall be Tempest's ambassador, Rimuru-sama, Xian declared boldly, her voice ringing out with confidence. I could already sense the other executives' faces fall, their expressions turning to one of fear and concern. They knew what was coming next. Absolutely not. I quickly shut her down, my tone firm. But Rimuru-sama, aren't I strong enough? Xian asked in despair, her voice catching in an almost comical way. Her energy had gone from exuberant to crushed in an instant. That's not the problem. You can't handle things in a diplomatic manner at all. I shot back, causing her to fall to the ground in defeat, her shoulders slumping as the realization set in. Kufufu. If the first secretary isn't up for it, it's up to me, Rimuru-sama, Diablo chimed in smugly, his voice dripping with amusement. Of course, Diablo wouldn't pass up the chance to comment on that, especially at Xian's expense. I could see the annoyance flash across her face as she glared at him. Sigh. These two and their stupid rivalry. They never seem to stop. I'm afraid that's out of the question, Diablo. While you are my strongest subordinate and capable of dealing with political matters, your plate is already full enough. I'd hate to add such a grueling task to your list, I said earnestly, hoping to rein in the conversation before it spiraled out of control. Diablo remained firm, his eyes locked onto mine. That is not a problem, Rimuru-sama, he insisted, his voice unwavering. I could practically feel his determination radiating off him. He really is persistent, huh? It's better if you focus on your assigned tasks. Rather, I have something else to ask you, Diablo, I said, doing my best to mask my inner thoughts. What is it? He asked, raising an eyebrow. There is someone in mind that I'd like to give this task to. However, they aren't a part of Tempest yet, I began, my voice lowering slightly to add an air of mystery to the conversation. I could see the curious expressions of my subordinates as their attention sharpened. There was a collective shift, a slight tension in the air as they waited for me to continue. But Rimuru-sama, being a Tempest representative in the Western Council is a major role. Wouldn't assigning that role to someone in our ranks be better? Rigard pointed out, his voice reasonable and pragmatic. He had a point. This was an important position, and ideally, someone already within Tempest's ranks would be best suited for it. Honestly, you're not wrong, I admitted. But everyone already has their respective roles, so I believe it's best to look elsewhere. Besides, Velzard suggested this person, and I'd like to ask Diablo here for more information regarding them, I explained, and the room calmed as everyone processed the information. Diablo's eyes widened for a moment. It was a rare occurrence. I turned to face the slightly surprised demon before asking, the curiosity in my voice rising. Diablo, tell me what you know about the White Primordial, Blanc. Chapter 24 The White Primordial Rimuru's paw. For a moment, Diablo was silent, his expression betraying a hint of surprise. It was understandable. After all, I had just casually mentioned his fellow primordial. Given the nature of their relationship, I suppose I couldn't blame him for being caught off guard. But there was more on my mind than just that. His mission in Falmouth had been ongoing for quite some time, and it had been a while since I received an update. Surely, there had been developments, some new information to consider. But that could wait. Right now, Blanc was my primary focus. Diablo eventually regained his composure, his usual smug demeanor returning. Everyone around the table waited patiently for his answer, and I could practically feel the tension in the air. This question would reveal more than just information about Blanc. "It's certainly been some time since we've met," Diablo finally said, his tone thoughtful. "Although, I'm sure not much has changed about her. Blanc is the White Primordial, the head of the White lineage of demons." His words hung in the air as I processed the information. "Have you two fought before?" I asked, curious to learn more. "Yes, but never to the death," Diablo replied, his eyes flickering with something akin to a memory. "Blanc has always been the most cunning of the three remaining primordials in the underworld, making her a formidable opponent. As for her demeanor, she's the epitome of a noblewoman. She's proud, cold, and calculating." Interesting. That certainly aligned with what Velzard had told me about her, a cunning and prideful primordial demon. If she were anything like Diablo, then she'd be more than capable of handling delicate matters like diplomatic negotiations. I glanced around the room, gauging the reactions of my executives. They were all quiet, but I could tell that they were listening intently, some curious, others concerned. Benimaru raised his hand, and I gave him a nod to speak. "What exactly would the ambassador do?" he asked, his voice steady. "Well, for starters, the ambassador would represent Tempest in front of other councils or groups. In this case, she'd represent us in the Western Council, assuming we can join," I explained. "As a demon lord, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to handle every diplomatic matter myself." "Indeed," Shuna chimed in, her voice warm but firm. "A king should only show himself when it's necessary." We all nodded in agreement, and I continued. "That's why I'll attend the first council meeting, but after that, the ambassador will handle any future meetings. They'll also take care of fulfilling contracts and handling negotiations with other nations," I said. Everyone seemed to understand the necessity of it. The role was important, but it would allow me to focus on other matters. "And you plan to have the White Primordial as your ambassador?" Kaijin asked, his expression a mix of skepticism and intrigue. I nodded. "That's the plan." A slight unease flickered across Kaijin's face. He clearly wasn't comfortable with the idea, but I was already determined. I then turned to Diablo. "Would it be possible to summon her?" I asked, my voice steady. "It is certainly possible," Diablo replied after a moment's thought. "But it may take some effort to convince Blanc to show up. I doubt she would answer a sudden summon. Her pride won't allow it. Don't be fooled by her gentle appearance. Blanc is immensely cruel, and her pride matches that of guys." I leaned back in my chair, considering his words. Based on Diablo's words, Blanc seemed to be cut from the same cloth as him, powerful and proud. It might be more complex than a pleasant negotiation if I summoned her. There was a chance she wouldn't cooperate at all. "Kufufu. If you'd like, I could go to the underworld and coerce her into showing up," Diablo added with a sly grin. "No thanks," I shot back immediately. I just wanted to know if I could summon her. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Diablo was always ready to go to extremes. Even among his fellow primordials, he was one of a kind. I had no doubt that if I let him, he'd do something reckless. But I had to know more. How likely is it for Blanc to willingly swear her loyalty to me? I asked, my gaze fixed on Diablo. Diablo's lips curled into a grin, but there was no mirth in it. He paused for a moment before answering. "It's unlikely she would willingly submit herself. Her pride is on par with guys. You would have to defeat her in battle after summoning her to make her recognize your greatness and swear loyalty to you," he informed me. I closed my eyes, processing the information. If I wanted Blanc to serve as my ambassador, it seemed that a battle would be inevitable. It's a hassle, yes, but not entirely unexpected. From what Diablo had said, Blanc was a perfect fit for the role. It would be worth the effort, but I had to be prepared for the fight. Alternatively, Diablo added, his voice lowering with an edge of satisfaction, if you destroy her core, she'll revive and become fully subservient to you. I raised an eyebrow. Destroy her core? I repeated, my voice tinged with worry. Wouldn't that erase her existence? Diablo shook his head. Not at all. Similar to true dragons, a primordial demon can't perish completely. However, there is a significant downside. If you destroy her core, she'll revive as your subordinate. Really? I asked, disbelief creeping into my voice. Yes. The blue and green primordials, Rain and Misery, are perfect examples. They challenged Guy in the underworld, and their cores were destroyed when they lost. They were revived as his subordinates, their loyalty forced by their defeat, he elaborated. So that's how Rain and Misery became his maids. When I learned that those two were primordials, I was utterly surprised, not just because they were primordials but also because they were serving another one of their kind. To think that they were once primordials who had fallen so low, it made me feel a little bad for them. Imagine serving him, of all people. But I wasn't sure I wanted to go that far. Destroying Blanc's core seemed excessive, even if it did guarantee her loyalty. Still, it was good to know that such a tactic existed just in case. I nodded, but inwardly, I was already weighing my options. If I had to fight Blanc to gain her loyalty, so be it. But for now, I had to keep moving forward with the plan. Seal. What are my odds of winning in a battle against the white primordial? 100%. Quite confident. Huh? How powerful is she? An unnamed primordial incarnating into the material world ranks as the highest level of archdemons, placing her in the low disaster class. However, this holds little weight against you. She's still formidable, but I doubt she'd stand a chance against Diablo now. Ever since he received a name, he shattered the ceiling of archdemons and evolved into a demon peer. But even before that, Diablo was a rival of Guy Crimson, which means that she likely couldn't have defeated him even then. Additionally, with my acquisition of a true dragon egg, the power of those connected to me has grown, even without further evolution. If I grant Blanc a name and open her path for evolution, she could become a valuable asset for Tempest. Assuming she's as cunning and powerful as Diablo claims, the risk is worth it. After weighing all the facts, I made my decision. All right, I finally said, resolving myself. I'll summon Blanc and convince her to join us. My executive smiled, nodding in approval. Ha ha ha, I knew you'd say that, Rimuru-sama, Benimaru said with a grin. I can only pray for any nation foolish enough to oppose us, Kaijin joked, shaking his head. Once the laughter died down, I continued. I'll hold the summoning ritual tomorrow in the sealed cave. Diablo, I want you there, but keep your presence hidden until I give the signal. Understood, Rimuru-sama, Diablo affirmed with a deep bow. I turned to Velzard, her eyes already on me, waiting for my following words. Velz-chan, I need you to do the same as Diablo, I said with a smile. Of course, she responded with a graceful bow. I'll battle her briefly, overwhelm her, and then Diablo will reveal himself. That should be enough to convince Blanc of my strength. Having you there will be the finishing touch, I explained with a sly grin. Foo tilde, you're almost making me feel sorry for her, Rimu-kun, Velzard teased. I highly doubt that, I countered, chuckling. Now that everything was in place, I had one more thing to discuss with Diablo. It concerned the Falmouth situation, but that could wait. Milam also hadn't given the signal for the expedition, so there was no rush in that regard. Third-person Pav Rimuru's thoughts shifted as he turned his attention to Diablo, prompting the demon to update him on the situation regarding Falmouth. Specifically, Rimuru wanted to know how the process of having Yume crowned as the new king was progressing, as it was a matter that would affect the stability of the region. Diablo, as always, was swift and efficient in his reporting. He explained the developments that had transpired over the past month. After King Edmelis, the previous ruler of Falmouth, stepped down from the throne, his younger brother Edward immediately assumed the position of king. However, this reign was short-lived. Diablo had ensured that Edward would be removed from power, ensuring that Yume would take the crown instead. The former King Edmelis had been relegated to a more academic role, focusing on teaching Yume the finer points of etiquette and governance. Meanwhile, Edward, although displaced, had taken up the cause of advocating for Yume, publicly endorsing him as the rightful ruler of Falmouth. The transition of power was moving smoothly, thanks to Diablo's careful manipulation from the shadows. With the political scene in Falmouth secured, Diablo had turned his focus to the 7 celestial sages. His suspicion had been growing for some time, and his investigations confirmed it. The sages were playing a dangerous game. He believed they were directly responsible for the escalating misunderstandings between Rimuru and Hinata. They had intercepted Rimuru's message to Hinata, altering its contents to stir tension between the demon lord and the saint. Diablo's sharp eyes and unparalleled intellect quickly deduced their intentions. The sages had aimed to create chaos between the two powerful figures, undermining their relationship and possibly setting them on a collision course. However, the sages' plan had been halted when Velzard's sudden arrival in Tempest caused them to pause, perhaps out of fear or hesitation. Despite their arrogance and apparent lack of insight, the sages knew better than to provoke the frost dragon. Having observed their every move, Diablo saw through their overconfidence and ignorance, and he had already moved to counter their schemes without allowing them to escalate. The situation had grown even direr when Diablo revealed his intervention in the sages' attempt to assassinate Archbishop Rayheim. Their goal had been to frame Diablo for the murder, an act that would have severely damaged his reputation and, by extension, Rimuru's public standing. Diablo had quietly thwarted their plans, ensuring their scheme was foiled without anyone knowing his involvement. His watchful eye had never left the sages since, though Rimuru had yet to grant permission for Diablo to deal with them more directly. Rimuru's expression darkened at this revelation. The sages were a clear and present danger. He made a mental note to discuss the matter with Luminous and Hanada after the expedition. If the 7 celestial sages were truly behind the schemes, they would not be allowed to continue unchecked. The implications of their actions were too significant to ignore, and Rimuru had no intention of letting them go unpunished. With that matter still lingering in his mind, Rimuru shifted his focus back to the task at hand. The expedition to JackDaWeb, where he would meet with the other major figures, was only a few days away. Those who would go were preparing for the journey. Meanwhile, Diablo would focus on assisting Blanc in becoming acquainted with Tempest and its ways, ensuring that she was fully integrated into their society before the next phase of their plans could begin. Rimuru had already planned a visit to Lubelius after the expedition. He would discuss the growing threat posed by the 7 celestial sages with Luminous and Hanada. He also considered joining the Western Council, but that was a secondary priority. It wasn't essential for the time being, but it was something he'd keep in mind for the future. As the meeting drew to a close, Rimuru made his final remarks, and the room began to clear. The hours had worn on, and it was now quite late into the night. Mentally exhausted from the discussions and the energy spent during the tournament, Rimuru made his way back home with his loyal maid by his side. When they arrived at their quarters, the day's exhaustion hit them both. Without exchanging many words, they quickly changed into their sleepwear and collapsed into their beds, seeking the solace of rest before the challenges of the coming days. Rimuru's pav whelp, today's the day I become an even bigger menace to society. As if I hadn't already disrupted this world's power balance enough, I was about to make it worse. I sure hope no one gets upset over that. Standing outside the entrance of the sealed cave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over me. This place held so many memories from when I first arrived in this world. Memories of my encounter with Veldora, the first time I stepped into this cave and felt the sheer magnitude of its power. Beside me stood Velzard and Diablo. I shot a quick glance at them, giving them a subtle nod. With that, I summoned the strength to open the entrance to the cave. As the heavy stone doors slid apart, the cool air inside greeted us, and we stepped into the shadows together. Man, the magicules have utterly dried up in here, I remarked loudly, the air feeling distinctly thinner than I remembered. Without Veldora-sama's presence inside the cave, the density of magicules has dropped significantly, Diablo informed, his voice calm but tinged with that ever-present authority. I nodded in agreement. I guess that makes sense. It was still hard to fully comprehend how much of an impact Veldora's presence had on this cave and this world, for that matter. Still, I can feel the faint remnants of Veldora's magicules in the air. I suppose such is to be expected from a true dragon. Even if it's been 2 years, his mark remains in the cave, Velzard added, her tone thoughtful. I can feel it as well, I affirmed. There was something almost comforting about it. Veldora's influence remained a powerful thread weaving through the space even in his absence. We continued walking deeper into the cave, the path familiar yet different now that so much had changed since my last visit. Eventually, we reached a familiar spot. 2 distinct holes in the walls stood out. One was a massive crater, the debris still levitating faintly above the impact point. Snow and ice, untouched by time, still clung to the edges of the crater, the coldness hanging in the air like a relic from the past. The other hole was narrow, deep, and charred, with faint sparks of lightning crackling at its edges. It almost seemed alive with energy. Era, tilde? I sensed the faint residue of frost magic and storm magic in those craters, Velzard commented, momentarily pausing as she scanned the marks left behind. I couldn't help but smirk, a little proud of the memories attached to those craters. This was where I first tested those two new abilities. It's been some time since then, I told her. Seeing the aftermath of my earliest experiments with true dragon magic was incredible. Those abilities, which once felt so overwhelming, were now second nature to me. The fact that the residue of my attacks still lingered was a testament to their raw power. Most impressive as always, Rimuru-sama, Diablo added with an air of earnestness. As usual, I ignored his random flattery, and we continued our walk deeper into the cave. The absence of Veldora's constant flow of magicules meant that the usual monsters and lifeforms that roamed the cave were nowhere to be found. Aside from the ever-present hippocute grass and patches of magic ore, the cave felt strangely still, locked away from the world for so long. After a while, we reached an ideal location. It was the perfect vantage point for Velzard to hide herself. Velz-chan, is it alright if I have you stationed in this location? I asked, glancing at her with a small smile. Very well, Rimuru-kun, she replied, her smile gentle and understanding. With Velzard in position, Diablo and I continued further down into the cave. I had a sense that this was all going to happen quickly, and the closer we got, the more intense the feeling of anticipation in the air became. The ritual ahead was no small feat, and I had no idea what to expect from the primordial demon I was about to summon. We soon arrived at the second location I had chosen. It was a suitable distance from where I intended to perform the summoning ritual, close enough for me to oversee everything but far enough away to maintain some degree of safety. Should Blanc prove incooperative, Diablo would be close by to step in, but I had no intention of relying on that. If I was going to prove my worth to a primordial demon, I needed to show her I could handle this on my own. Alright, here's a perfect spot. Diablo, I want you to hold position here and conceal your presence as much as possible, I ordered firmly. Understood, Rimuru-sama, Diablo affirmed with a respectful bow, his eyes sharp as he vanished from my immediate view. Now that Velzard and Diablo were in position, it was time to proceed. I made my way deeper into the cave, finally reaching the heart of the area where Veldora had once been sealed. The space was vast yet scattered with rocks and spikes. I took a moment to scan my surroundings, mentally assessing the best place to begin the ritual. It had to be somewhere clear, somewhere the energy of the summoning would be uninterrupted. Not long after, I spotted an ideal location, a flat, clear area free from obstruction. Snapping my fingers, I erected a barrier around myself, ensuring that the inevitable chaos of the ritual wouldn't damage anything. Taking a deep breath, I focused. Diablo had warned me that summoning a primordial would require an immense amount of magicules, but I had plenty to spare. That wasn't going to be an issue. Activate, high-tier demon summoning. I offer you my immense magic power. Make good use of it. Heed my call, Blanc. Show yourself and face me. I commanded firmly, my voice reverberating through the cave. A massive surge of magicules erupted from my body, flooding the summoning circle. The air crackled with energy as streaks of white flames began to emerge from the center of the circle. Bright red flares followed soon after, blending together in a fiery dance. The fire burned brightly for minutes on end, flickering wildly as Blanc slowly responded to my call. I could already feel her presence, a menacing and powerful aura radiating from the growing figure. The flames twisted, slowly forming into the shape of a woman. Finally, the shape solidified. Before me stood the white primordial, Blanc. The white fire continued to dance around her form as if it were a part of her essence. She was tall, with long, flowing white hair that cascaded down to her waist. Her crimson-red eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity, full of malice and power. The elegant dress she wore was befitting a noblewoman of some otherworldly realm. Her expression made it clear that she was not pleased with being summoned so casually and so abruptly. If anything, I could sense the irritation emanating from her, likely amplified by the fact that I looked like a human. And probably because I hadn't even bothered with any formalities. But hey, it was too late now. The ritual was complete, and the primordial was here. Now, I just had to deal with the fallout. So, you're the foolish mortal who decided to summon me? Blanc asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Yup, I'm glad you showed up. I replied cheerfully, barely an ounce of concern in my tone. For a brief moment, Blanc just stared at me, clearly thrown off by my casual demeanor. She was probably expecting some trembling mortal, but instead, here I was, chipper and entirely unbothered. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to make sense of my confidence. He. All according to plan. It's rather bold of you to summon a demon and offer nothing besides magicules. Did you intend to offer yourself as a sacrifice? Did you weigh out the consequences of your actions? Do you know who I am? Her last question practically boomed, a powerful tone that spoke volumes about her irritation. No, yes, and yes are my answers to your questions, Blanc, I said, my voice dripping with mockery. She did her best to keep her composure, but I could see the slight twitch in her eye, a sign that my words had struck a nerve. She was definitely irritated, and I was beginning to enjoy this a little too much. I can't tell if you're being a fool, naive, or simply confident. State your purpose, human, she demanded, her patience clearly thinning. Whoa. What's the rush, Primordial San? You seem really bothered, I teased, leaning into her growing frustration. It worked. I could see the flicker of genuine anger flash across her face. She was definitely getting wound up. This was starting to get fun. Listen here, mortal, she snarled. I come from a domain far from here, and you decided to summon me out of nowhere. At first, I ignored the call, but it wouldn't stop. I surmised that someone was attempting to summon me in particular, so I begrudgingly accepted. You'd better have a good reason for calling me. My patience is thin. I shrugged casually, unfazed by her threats. Fine, I'll get straight to the point then. I'm looking for a demon of your skill set. I summoned you so that I could recruit you into my ranks. If you decide to accept, I'll offer you a proper body and even a name. How's that sound? Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, I was sure I saw a flicker of doubt in her gaze. That was the reaction I was hoping for. I chuckled inwardly. Messing with primordials was definitely a new level of fun. I could almost hear past me groaning at my recklessness. But hey, I had my reasons. Confidence goes a long way, especially when you're not walking into a situation blind. I still had to be careful, though. Had Blanc been much more powerful, this whole conversation would have taken a much different turn. But right now, she seemed more puzzled than anything. And you expect me to believe your word? Why should I serve under a mere mortal? She sneered, her crimson eyes narrowing suspiciously. Mortal? You've been calling me a mortal for quite some time now, I said, tilting my head slightly. Yet I'm sure you know better than that. I managed to summon you, a primordial demon, with nothing but my magic power. Do you really believe any human could accomplish such a feat? Her reaction was priceless. Blanc was stunned, her mouth opening slightly in disbelief. It finally seemed to sink in for her. I wasn't quite the mere mortal she had assumed. The summoning ritual had taken minutes to complete, and she'd likely been reluctant to answer my call. But still, she'd come, and now she was questioning everything. Who are you? She stammered, the confidence in her voice faltering. A sly grin slowly spread across my face. How rude of me for not introducing myself. I am the Demon Lord, Rimuru Tempest. Blanc's Pav Demon Lord? Is he only a Demon Lord by title, or did he manage to awaken? Wait, I faintly recall Violet mentioning the awakened Demon Lord that Noir now served. It had been some time since then, and I had barely paid attention to her ramblings. Could this be the same one she spoke of? The one who summoned me? At first, I'd thought I was dealing with a mere mortal, someone who should have known better than to try and summon a primordial like myself. But now, standing before him, it was clear that he was no ordinary mortal. I didn't want to admit it, but the fact that he had managed to summon me this far, holding the summoning circle together so long, said more about his abilities than I cared to admit. It would require a significant amount of magicules to keep such a ritual intact. Though only minutes had passed for him, time in the underworld flows differently than in the cardinal world. I had felt that call for hours, refusing to answer it first. But it was stubborn and persistent, almost as though it had been specifically aimed at me. I hadn't given it much thought, but now, standing here, it was impossible to ignore. He wasn't just any summoner. I shook off the thought, refocusing on the task at hand. I had to regain my composure and not let this situation distract me. It's quite the surprise to be called by the newly awakened true Demon Lord, I said playfully, masking my growing wariness with a touch of sarcasm. Ha ha ha, I just told you. I wish to recruit you into my ranks, he replied, utterly casual. HMPH. How bold. But just because he's a demon lord doesn't mean I'm going to bend the knee that easily. Just because you're a demon lord doesn't mean I'll easily submit myself, I retorted sharply, my pride rising with every word. Did you forget my offer, Blanc? He raised a brow, his expression challenging yet carefree. Not at all, demon lord, I replied, shaking my head lightly as if to dismiss his words. The offer of a proper body and a name was tempting, but my pride wouldn't let me submit to someone who was still a new demon lord. For all I knew, he might be bluffing. There were significant consequences for naming a primordial, and I doubted he'd take such a risk. I wasn't fully incarnated, but I was still a primordial, and I would prove it. He needed to understand that I was not to be commanded, no matter what title he held. I can't just drop this now, you know. I've come this far. Surely there's a way to convince you, he said, half jokingly, though his eyes told a different story. He's really pushing for it, huh? If that's the case, I suppose I could entertain the thought. I could test his capabilities before putting him in his place. After all, he was a newly awakened true demon lord, hardly an easy opponent. I have a proposal, Demon Lord Rimuru, I said, watching as his grin widened in anticipation. Ho! Do tell, he replied, his voice almost too eager. It's simple. Defeat me in 3 minutes, and you'll have my undying loyalty, I declared, my tone firm and unyielding. I was confident. 3 minutes would be more than enough for me to gauge his abilities and dispose of him if need be. He would regret ever thinking he could challenge me. That's it? Consider it done, he answered, his voice unwavering. However, I'm sure I don't need to tell you the consequences if you lose, do I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He simply nodded, still with that carefree attitude of his. Very well, then, I muttered under my breath, my patience worn thin. This would be over quickly, one way or another. Without saying another word, I shot forward, my feet barely touching the ground as I closed the distance between us in an instant. My eyes locked onto him, standing so still, so confident. His arrogance would be his downfall. I raised my open palm at him, focusing the energy that pulsed within me, and released a point-blank, nuclear cannon. The force of the explosion shattered the stillness of the cave, sending a deafening roar echoing through the chamber. The blast rattled the very walls, debris spiraling in every direction. Smoke and dust billowed, enveloping the area in a thick, choking haze. I didn't wait to see the results. I immediately withdrew, leaping back to a safer distance. My senses were heightened, my focus razor-sharp, as I watched for any sign of movement through the settling cloud. Seconds passed, and the dust slowly began to clear. I scanned the wreckage, expecting to see the charred remains of my foe disintegrated by the sheer power of my attack. But instead, my breath caught in my throat. Nothing. He wasn't there. My heart skipped a beat. What? Was he disintegrated? No, it couldn't be. Nice attack. A voice suddenly rang out, cutting through the still air. I whipped around, but it was too late. Before I could even register what was happening, a bolt of lightning shot through the air, striking with the force of a thunderstorm. It hit my left arm with blinding speed, and in an instant, it was vaporized. Pain. Intense, searing pain. The shockwave of the strike coursed through my very being, sending a burning jolt into my soul itself. My body trembled, a foreign sensation of being electrocuted tearing through me. What was that? That wasn't just any ordinary, lightning magic. It wasn't even remotely close. I staggered back, clutching at my wound, but already my body was working to regenerate. I wouldn't be put down so easily. The damage was undone, my arm slowly reforming, but as I finished healing, I felt a sudden unease. My eyes darted around, scanning the area. He was gone. Again, a blur of motion caught my attention from the corner of my eye. There he was, moving with unnatural speed, his figure a flash that danced around me as if mocking my every movement. It was like he was toying with me. Frustration flared within me. He was too fast, too unpredictable. I needed to end this. Without hesitation, I formed an abyss core, the dark power surging in my hands. I crushed it, unleashing Death Streak, the destructive wave pulsing outward in all directions. Even for spiritual lifeforms like us, surviving this was nearly impossible. But as the wave surged forward, I quickly realized something was wrong. It was moving slower, far slower than it reasonably should. What? I snapped, watching the waves sluggishly expand. It should have been faster and more immediate. Nice try, Blanc. His voice echoed again, and I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. What did he do? Suddenly, the ground beneath me froze. White ice spread everywhere, coating the area with an almost supernatural chill. My body and movements slowed as if time itself were being stretched. No, it wasn't just slow. It felt like I was actively being decelerated. The waves of death from Deathstreak were now crawling, barely moving. It was as if the very forces of destruction had been frozen in place. Impossible. There's no way he's using that. Slow down, he called out, his voice clear and certain. And then it happened. The world around me seemed to warp, and time itself distorted. Everything else slowed to a crawl, and the space around me thickened with a heavy stillness, except for him. Rimuru moved through this frozen moment like nothing had changed. His figure remained fluid, unimpeded, as though he was unaffected by the slowed time. It was then I understood. He wasn't just using any kind of magic. No, he was using true dragon magic. That lightning attack from earlier was undoubtedly an attack using the power of the storm dragon. And now, he was using the frost dragon's magic. A surge of chains formed out of thin air, cold and ruthless, wrapping around me with terrifying precision. The ice tightened, constricting around my body and forcing me to my knees. I struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter the chains became. I couldn't move, couldn't even manipulate the magicules around me. My senses dulled, the power I had at my disposal slipping through my fingers. So, this is the power of the true dragons, huh? How was a mere demon lord wielding it? Rimuru stood before me, calm and composed, with that infuriating grin still on his face. He didn't look like he was even trying. Sigh. I breathed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I must begrudgingly admit it. You are incredibly powerful. I've fought with the other two primordials in the underworld countless times, and yet, this battle has been the most one-sided. Humiliating, even. In fact, calling it a battle would be a stretch, I muttered. I couldn't hold my pride up anymore. I had been bested. There was no denying it. To my surprise, Rimuru didn't taunt me or press the advantage. Instead, he shook his head, his grin softening into something more sincere. Don't beat yourself up over it, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. You're powerful. You still have so much room to grow. And because of that, I'll let you decide. Follow me, and I'll grant you the means to become even stronger. Or, you can go back to the underworld, and I won't bother you again. The offer hung in the air, impossible to ignore. I remained silent, contemplating. My defeat meant I should uphold my end of the contract, yet here he was, offering me an alternative. Could he really pave the way for me to grow stronger? To reach the level one had always envied? I had fought on even ground with John and Violet, but they were nothing compared to Rouge or Noir. Their power was untouchable, absurd. If I could stand by Rimuru, could I tap into that potential? I steeled my resolve. The choice was clear. I admit my defeat, I said, my voice firm but not without a trace of reluctance. From here on out, I pledge my undying loyalty to you, Master. I ended with a bow. Rimuru nodded with a smile, and he snapped his fingers in an almost casual motion. The chains binding me vanished, their icy grip dissolving into nothingness. Immediately, the world around us began to move as it had before. Time seemed to resume its normal pace, and the cave returned to its previous state. With another flick, the damage caused by our skirmish was repaired instantly. I turned to face him, my new master, and without hesitation, I knelt on the ground before him. It's rather shameful for a primordial demon such as myself to swear my undying loyalty, I admitted, my voice steady, but my heart was conflicted. However, you've more than proven your vast superiority. So with that, I am yours to command. Rimuru nodded, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. His approval was clear, but there was no arrogance in his demeanor. It was simply natural. And as promised, I shall grant you a proper body and a name, he said with calm assurance. I am grateful for it, Master, I replied sincerely, the words feeling heavier than I'd expected. The weight of my submission to him was real, but so was the gratitude. He was offering me something more than just power. He was offering me purpose. With a wave of his hand, Rimuru summoned a bone golem before us. At first glance, the golem appeared unremarkable, but as I took a closer look, I felt the unmistakable quality it possessed. It was more than enough to serve as a vessel for a demon as powerful as myself. This bone golem is made of orichalcum, a magical alloy crafted from gold and magisteel. We don't have many of these lying around, so you're quite fortunate. Use it as your new host, Rimuru told me, his tone matter of fact. Thank you, Master, I said again, this time with genuine appreciation. He was giving me a new body, one suited to my power. It was a perfect vessel, capable of fully channeling my abilities. Just call me Rimuru, he corrected, his voice light, almost teasing. As you wish, Rimuru-sama, I replied, my tone respectful but filled with a subtle warmth. I stepped forward, reaching out to transfer my essence into the bone golem. The process was swift, the transfer smooth, and in no time, I was already transforming the golem's appearance to match my preferences. I altered its features to reflect my newfound strength and elegance, molding it to fit my proper form. The sensation was extraordinary. I could feel it coursing through me, a rush of magicules flooding my being, amplifying my very existence. The body was perfect, capable of holding my immense power and far beyond what I'd had before. I looked to Rimuru, who stood with an approving smile. He was watching me, but his expression was more than just approval. It was pride. From this day onward, you shall now be known as Testarossa, he said with genuine joy. Fulfill your duty and live up to your new name. The moment those words left his lips, a torrent of magicules poured from him, enveloping me in a cocoon of light. I felt myself rising off the ground, my body trembling with the sheer influx of power. It didn't stop there. My magic surged, the energy spiking as I broke through the ceiling of an archdemon. A burst of light exploded from within me, marking my evolution. In a few seconds, I was transformed into a demon peer. The evolution was complete. The air around me buzzed with energy, and I could feel the shift in my very being. My power was now boundless yet controlled. I landed softly on the ground, my newly formed body feeling both foreign and familiar at once. I bowed deeply to my new master, the gravity of my decisions settling on my shoulders. Rimuru-sama, I will be forever grateful for your blessings, I said, my voice filled with reverence. You have my utmost loyalty. Straightening up, I met his gaze. There was no more uncertainty, no more second-guessing. Rimuru's satisfied expression never wavered. But just as he turned to lead the way, something stirred in the air. It was an unexpected presence, lingering, almost familiar. Kufufu, it's good to see that you've remained as wise as ever, Blanc,